My mom caught me with her fiancé. You won't believe her reaction. The sun was slipping below the horizon as vivid hues of orange and pink painted the sky. California had always been a dream, a place where everything seemed warmer, brighter. The air tasted different here, softer, salty, and sun-kissed. This was meant to be a fresh start, a healing trip for us, a family seeking renewal amidst fractured dynamics. Noah was there waiting when we arrived, his shoulders broad and posture open, his confidence radiating in a way that made you want to stay in his gravity. He hugged my mother first, his hands lingering a moment too long on her arms as he leaned back to smile at her, and then he turned to me. His gaze was direct, and when he said, "You must be Lily," his voice cut through me like warm honey, thick, smooth, and heavy in my chest. I wanted to look away. I didn't. Noah was charming, maddeningly so. He filled the room effortlessly, always with the perfect quip or laugh, transforming silences into threads that knit us all closer together. My mother adored him. For her, he was the answer, the glue, steadying what felt like the fragile pieces of our once intact family. At first, I wanted to see what she saw, to find solace in his humor and attentiveness. Maybe I wanted to trust him the way she did, but instead I found myself noticing him. The way his tattoos curved and disappeared beneath his shirt sleeves drew my eyes. His laugh had a way of staying in the air long after it quieted, and when he looked at me, the weight of it lingered, pressing a restless heat against my skin. It was there, unspoken but palpable, an electric hum of tension I couldn't name or justify. With every passing glance, every casual pat on the shoulder during a family game, an unsettling question began gnawing at the edges of my mind. Was it only me who felt this? The house, though beautiful, was a little too small for the dynamics we'd brought here. By some twist of unfortunate logistics or deliberate fate, I found myself sharing a room with Noah. There were 2 twin beds, separated by a small wooden nightstand. "It'll be fine. Relax," my mother said, waving away my protests like I was overreacting. "You're family." But that night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, the tension in my body was impossible to ignore. I could hear every shift in Noah's breathing, every creak when he turned over in bed. My mind raced, not just with thoughts of guilt, but also confusion. Why was I so hyper-aware of him, of his mere presence? At one point, I rolled onto my side, facing him, though his eyes were closed. His face looked softer in sleep. The hard lines of his confident exterior melted into something more vulnerable. I hated the way my chest tightened at the sight. Worse, I hated that it didn't feel like hate at all. The days fell into an awkward rhythm none of us addressed. Beach mornings, lazy afternoons, and dinners drenched in twilight. Noah was everywhere, at the table, next to me during family board games, his voice soft yet commanding during conversations. And yet, it was the quiet moments that unraveled me most. The times when our hands brushed as we passed dishes, when a casual comment he made lingered just a bit too heavily in the air. The magnetism of his presence wasn't brash or intentional. It was subtle, insidious even, like a current running beneath my skin. One evening, he asked me to walk with him outside. My mother was asleep early. Her laughter had fizzled into exhaustion from wine and sunlight. It wasn't unusual for Noah to engage me like this, and yet, as we walked along the sand, the breeze cool against my exposed arms, everything felt too intimate, too open for words to fill the space. He talked about life, about mistakes, longing, and finding meaning amid chaos. What haunted me wasn't what he said, but the way he said it, his tone curling towards something deeper, something for me alone. In moments, standing there under the stars, it was impossible to tell whether the pull between us was imagined or real. I didn't see it coming, not entirely. The second night began innocuously, the way these things often do, quiet, comfortable, even routine. The house echoed with stillness, and in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, I read lazily, my body heavy with salt air and fatigue. Noah came into the room, shirtless, his presence filling what little space there was. "Too hot for anything else," he said casually, waving toward his bare chest as though that explained everything. I looked away quickly, my cheeks burning. "It's fine," I murmured, though my fingers tightened around the book in my lap. Neither of us acknowledged the silence that followed. And when he sat on the edge of his bed, just close enough for me to sense his warmth, the stillness between us thickened. I felt it then, a pull, a thread strung so tightly between us that I couldn't tell who was holding the knot. "Lily," he said softly, his voice lower than usual, a weight in his tone I couldn't read. I turned reluctantly to meet his gaze and immediately regretted it. His eyes, heavy-lidded, lingered on mine with an intensity that stole words from my tongue. The sound of my own voice broke through, and I stood abruptly, the book tumbling to the floor. "I need air." He didn't stop me as I fled, but his expression followed me, a ghost I couldn't shake. The next day I avoided him. I avoided everyone, in truth. My mother noticed but didn't press, chalking it up to a pensive mood. If only it had been that easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his face, his presence, the unspoken thing that lingered in our shared space. I hated myself for feeling it, for being unable to untangle the web of longing, guilt, and dread tightening around me. I replayed it all obsessively, the way his gaze lingered, the way I never pulled away, even when I should have. What did that make me? By the final days of our trip, everything felt fragile. The dynamic we had tried to piece together as a family, crumbling. My mother and Noah had begun arguing, small murmurs of dissatisfaction crackling beneath the surface. "You're not as present as you think you are," I heard her say once, her voice tinged with frustration. "You're not as present as you think you are," I heard her say once, her voice tinged with frustration. "You're not as present as you think you are," I heard her say once, her voice tinged with frustration. And when Noah looked my way in the aftermath, there was something resigned in his expression, like I'd become his only anchor left. It was in his presence, his touch when he handed me a glass, his shoulder brushing mine far too long to be accidental, that the once shared tension between us crescendoed. But I did nothing. I only carried the weight. By the time we left California, we were no longer the family that had arrived. My mother's laughter had faded into sharp, distracted remarks. Noah's sparkle seemed dulled beneath shadows of unease. And me, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I watched Noah hug my mother goodbye at the airport, their touch distant now, curt and cold. When he turned to me, his hesitation was almost imperceptible. And yet, when our eyes met, I felt it, the faintest flicker of something that could have been apology or regret. I nodded briefly as he pulled away, swallowing words too messy to be spoken. Later, back home, I stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against my skin. On the horizon, stars glittered, fragile and impossibly far away. My heart felt the same, light and fragmented, a mess of moments and emotions I wasn't sure how to piece back together. Somewhere along the line, I'd lost a part of myself, and I wasn't sure if it was gone forever or if I would eventually rebuild. Noah had been a chapter, a lesson in boundaries and mistakes, of desire tangled in the web of human connection. He had left his mark, no matter how desperately I wanted to erase it. And yet, as I looked out at the sky, I realized this tangled journey wasn't just about him. It was about me, what I could accept, what I could forgive, and how I could finally begin again.